Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Inside English Academy. So, today's video is going to be on the topic keeping quiet. That's a topic from the poetry section of the syllabus for HS final year, that is HS second year. I hope all my students are doing good, staying home, and keeping safe. Before moving on to the poem, I'd like to tell you something about how to read a poetry, how to read a poem. Why do you think is there this division in these two sections? Like one is a poetry section, one is the prose section. Why do we need this division? It's because we need a different approach for reading both these kinds of literature. In prose, we've come across stories, we have come across essays which are written in very straightforward language. But in poetry, the language that the poets use, that is quite different from the language that is used by the authors while writing prose. Why is it so? Because poetry is all about conveying a message in a covert manner. Covert is the opposite of overt. Covert is in a hidden manner. That is, one is the literal level and one is the metaphorical level. So, when we say the color red, when we come across the word red in a poem, it might mean the color red, or it might also mean something else which we generally associate with the color red. It might mean love, it might mean fire, it might mean energy, because red also symbolizes energy, fire, passion, or danger. So, in poetry, we will come across such intricate and such smart use of words, of language, and that is what makes poetry poetry. It's different from prose. So in this poem also we come across certain techniques and certain words which are used by the poet Pablo Neruda. So the poet is from the country Chile. It's located in the continent South America, and this poet has won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1971. And this poet, he makes very delicate use of imagery, simple imagery, to convey his message. This poem that we are about to read, it can be considered as a peace poem. Why a peace poem? Because P-E-A-C-E. Because through this poem, he is trying to convey a message to his readers about unity, harmony, and about giving ourselves that time to introspect. Introspect is to look within ourselves, to be able to understand each other, understand ourselves better, and understand our surroundings much better. Before reading the poem, I'd like to tell you something about how to read a poem. For reading a poem, we need certain kind of understanding and knowledge, because reading a poem is no less than an art. And while reading a poetry, for reading a poetry, we need the knowledge of certain terms, certain factors, like the language that is used in poetry, the tone that is used in poetry, and theme that is used in poetry. So, what is theme? That is the basic idea or the chief message of the poem, which we can say as the crux of the poem. C-R-U-X, crux. Crux is the central idea of a poem. So every poem, it either conveys a message or it tries to arouse some kind of sensation in the minds of the readers. In this poem also the poet, he tries to convey his message by using simple imagery. The next important factor is tone. Every poet, while writing his poetry, while writing his poem, he uses some kind of tone. What is tone in general? The way I'm talking to you now, I'm talking to you in a certain tone. The way you talk to your friends, you talk to them in a certain tone. That is our voice, intonation, the way we are saying what we are saying, and that is the tone in which we are saying. This poem is about the earth coming to a standstill, the world coming to a standstill. Standstill is the moment when we stop doing what we have been doing so far. This poem conveys the message through this poem, the poet tries to convey the message to his readers about the significance of silence, the significance of keeping quiet. And that's why the title of the poem is very important. It can be either directly conveying the meaning of the poem, that's the theme of the poem, like in this poem, or it can also be completely different from what we are going to read in a poem. But there has to be some kind of association with the message that is conveyed in the poem, and that association can be either direct or indirect. So the title of the poem also becomes important in that case. Let's read this poem. Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. Now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. Why is the poet saying or urging his readers to count to 12? What's the significance of this number 12? Perhaps it suggests the 12 months in a year. Perhaps it also means the 12 numbers in the clock, or it can also mean that there are 3 hands in the clock, and when all the 3 hands denoting hour, minute and second, when all the 3 hands coincide and point towards the number 12, we are about to begin a new day. So there is a possibility that the poet is trying to use the word 12 due to this significance of the number 12. See, literature is all about interpretation. We cannot say directly that this is what the poet means. As long as it is going with our theme, with the theme of the poem, the basic message of the poem, we cannot say that this is wrong, this is a wrong interpretation, this is a right interpretation, because the poets do not mention anything clearly. But we have to be as close to the basic idea of the poem as possible. We have to remain as close to the basic idea as possible. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. This time, the poet is talking about keeping quiet in literal terms. That is, let's not talk to each other. Let's not speak in any language. See, in general terms, language is seen as a symbol of unity, as a unifying agent in the society. That is, it is a factor which people use to connect to each other. But from our reading of this poem, what the poet possibly tries to explain to his readers is that language also has the capacity to divide the society and bring about discrimination. And that's why he urges his readers to try silence instead. And maybe in this moment of silence, we will find back our unity which was lost because of our overindulgence in language. Let's stop for 1 second and not move our arms so much. And this time the poet is talking about the physical movement. because physical movement, it not just denotes work, it not just denotes physical activity, but also violence. When we argue with somebody, we move our hands too much. When we are trying to prove our point or establish our point, we make the use of our hands. So, the poet tries to tell his readers to at least try not using one's hands, not doing anything for one moment and see what happens. It would be an exotic moment. This is the reply that he gives. He gives us the question, he gives us a proposal, and he also gives us the answer. It would be an exotic moment, the poet says. And why he says that it would be an exotic moment? The meaning of the word exotic is something that is foreign to us. Foreign here implies something that we are not familiar with. We are familiar with a certain way of life, with a certain way of going about in our life. But the poet says that when we are going to stop talking to each other for a moment, stop using our hands to express ourselves, in that moment of silence, perhaps we will find an exotic moment. We'll give ourselves the gift of exotic moment, which we are not familiar with yet. Without rush, without engines. And this is why he calls this moment exotic, because there will be no traffic. Don't you think this stanza, this thing about exotic moment that the poet talks of, it is quite relatable to our situation now? Because in this situation of a pandemic, the name of which is coronavirus, it's a global pandemic, and the world has come to a standstill. Everything has stopped. But have we stopped living? We haven't stopped living. There is no traffic on the road. There might be one or two vehicles, but there are no traffic anywhere in the world. And that's the moment what the poet actually wants to suggest. Without rush, without engines, there is no factory operating at this moment. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. And right now, what we are feeling, it's a moment of a strange feeling that we are going through, because we're not used to this silence, we're not used to this confinement. We're confined inside our homes. But this is just a reference. This is not for you to write in your exams. In your exams, you cannot write about coronavirus and this lockdown. I'm just giving you an example as a reference so that you can understand this situation and relate it to what the poet is actually trying to say. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. We will be in a strangeness because otherwise we are used to noise, we're used to chaos and rush in our day-to-day lives. But when we will stop talking, when we will stop moving our hands, it will be an exotic moment, and it will be a strange thing for all of us, which will be imposed upon us if we see it negatively or in a forcible way, or which we will be getting because of ourselves suddenly, without any prior preparation. Fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales, and the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. Here the poet is talking about nature versus man. Fisherman can be looked at from the literal meaning, that is, yes, he might be referring to those fishermen who are working daily and engaged in the act of fishing. They're catching whales every day, but it might also refer to those people who are strong, who are rich, who are powerful, and the way they exploit the weak, the way they suppress the ones who are weaker them or below them. So it's, in a way, the poet is trying to tell us that in this moment of silence, there will be no hierarchy. Hierarchy is when somebody is above us and somebody is below us. We have this distinction in the society where there is no equality. And in this moment of silence, maybe we will find the equality which is lost in the society. And the man gathering salt would look at his hurt hands. And here the poet is referring to those weaker sections which is constantly working for somebody who is more powerful than him, somebody who is richer than him. The weaker section is not allowed to take care of itself, to take care of its own needs. And maybe in this moment of silence, the weak people, the weak man would get that chance, that moment to look at his hurt hands, to look at his wounds and introspect and look at his own activity. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire, victory with no survivors. Here the poet talks about man versus nature once again. So it is a reiteration of the previous message. What is reiteration? reiteration. It is repetition of the same message. In the previous stanza also the poet talks about man exploiting nature by using the example of fishermen fishing and catching whales each day. And in this stanza, he talks about those people who are constantly waging wars against nature, who are trying to just call themselves developed, industrialized, and successful by keeping nature, by keeping the environment at stake. They do not care about the consequences of their greed, the consequences of their greed for development, the greed for industrialization, the greed for progress, which is actually hindering the man-nature, man-environment bond. So here the poet says, those who prepare green wars is the war with environment, wars with gas,